Prior information. A few days prior to my birthday, my sister brought her boyfriend to our house. It was a disaster, but in brief, they were getting sick. I was reassured over and over again that it was allergies. I had a face mask on around them, and they never wore any protection, so they just coughed and sneezed however they wanted. After my birthday, I had to take my mother, who has a lung condition, to see her sister at the hospital who has pneumonia. I waited outside in the truck and I felt my throat getting dry, and I thought it was the cold air. I also did go inside the hospital to say hi to my aunt. Then, my boyfriend came to visit me for my late birthday over the weekend. I told him that I wasn't sure for him to visit since my throat was still very dry. He also reassured me that it would be fine and it didn't matter because this was planned out for over a month ago to see each other. Once he came to visit, I had a full-blown fever and I just wasn't feeling well. I did ask my sister to take my temperature, but my boyfriend was the only one that took care of me. My sister said I was just warm and that I didn't have a fever and that my room was freezing, but I ended up with a massive headache and shivering for 3 hours until my boyfriend noticed I was crying and couldn't sleep and took care of me. Today, I was woken up by my mom to translate to the nurses about how my aunt was doing. My mom asked me if I was feeling better so that I could drive her to see her sister. It's about a 2-hour drive to see her. I told her no and to please leave me alone because I wasn't feeling great. My mom left mumbling about needing to sanitize her phone. I stayed in my room trying to quarantine when my boyfriend told me his parents found an extra testing kit at home and he tested positive for COVID. I apologized a lot and told him it was my fault, but he said it was worth it to see me. His mother brought him food and medicine, and I just thought maybe I could ask someone to bring me a face mask or something to eat since I was in my room all day. I texted my mom if she could bring me something to eat or at least a face mask so I could go out into the kitchen to prepare something to eat. She calls me yelling at me for being ungrateful, careless, and stupid for getting COVID. I hung up, I don't know how many calls, but the second to last call she told me I needed to man up and stop complaining and get things done myself, and that I should try to find a COVID test because I wasn't the one who gave COVID to my boyfriend and that it was him. She calls me one last time and bangs on my door a few times to tell me she left me something in the bathroom for my throat. She also told me to change my bedsheet since I had a fever. I went to the bathroom. The concoction she made was vinegar and baking soda and hot water and a bottle of hydrogen peroxide on the side. None of that made me feel any better. I would also like to say that it is my fault for contacting COVID and allowing this to spread to my significant other. I've been crying a lot today and feeling extremely guilty. Next story. I am 38M and the following events took place when I was about 12. So details will be few, but I will share what I know. Background. I grew up in a semi-developed area. Back when my grandparents on my mother's side first purchased the land, the area was fairly rural, but over time a neighborhood grew up around them. As their children grew up, my grandparents decided to divide the property they owned into several parcels and gave each of their kids a plot of land. My grandpa was also a house mover. Note, moving the actual buildings from one location to another, not moving people or belongings from one house to another, and so helped them move houses from an area that was slated to be demolished to build a highway onto the new parcels. I grew up with all my immediate neighbors being my family. As time marched forward, my aunts and uncles moved to new locations as their housing needs changed. In other words, like new job, more kids than rooms, etc. As they moved out, the new neighbors were pulled into the environment and became close family friends as we were all friendly, and it gave the area a small town feel even though by this point we were part of a larger city now. One day, one of these new neighbors had gotten his realtor's license and was constantly approaching my parents with amazing opportunities to purchase land as an investment. My parents, being good friends with this neighbor, didn't want to offend him by telling him that they weren't interested and would never be interested, and decided to instead give him a long list of requirements for the property and that they would be interested in buying. The list included: it needed to be within 2 hours driving distance, it needed to be away from any major cities, it needed to be within 5 minutes of a nearby town, you shouldn't be able to see said town, it had to be at least 1 acre, about 4,000 square meters, it needed a stream running through it. There were other requirements, but I don't remember them all. The only other requirement that my parents gave this family friend was that it had to be at a price so low they figured they had sent him off on a unicorn hunt. 1 week later, he came back with their unicorn. In the past, a less than scrupulous realtor had a client that wanted to invest in land. This realtor sold him bits and pieces of mostly useless land. Think thousands of acres chopped up into useless chunks. In other words, a couple of acres on the side of a mountain so steep that you couldn't build on it, or a few acres that could be used but was landlocked by other owners without any access to it. After he passed on, his daughters were selling this land to get what they could pay for it. The unicorn property was one of the few that was accessible and flat enough to be usable with enough slope to keep the stream running through it from being a flood hazard. The surrounding land was used by farmers that raised sheep or turkeys. Most of these farmers own thousands of acres, so when the realtor selling had approached them about possibly buying 3 acres, they all dismissed it as not worth their time. This is important later. My parents, after some serious discussions with each other over what to do, decided to buy the property. After all, it was an opportunity that was too good to pass up, and the number that my parents had given was within their means, even if it was a stretch on their finances. They did everything by the books. An independent survey was conducted and the surveyor drove stakes into the ground at all 4 corners of the lot. It ended up being about 3 acres of land. Now, the survey was off from some of the fences in the area, as those fences had been done informally by the farmers as a way of keeping livestock from wandering off. My family consists of my parents, me, and my 3 siblings. Us kids were just old enough to be of help on construction projects, and as my parents didn't have extra cash to pay a contractor to build the house, they decided that instead of taking a camping trailer we had out camping, they would instead park it on our new property and develop the land ourselves. This property was now our vacation property. As we laid out where the fence lines would be, we noticed that the neighbor's gate to access his property was mostly on our side of the property line, but some was on his side as well. Now, we had used this gate to get in, as this gate was locked by a chain that had several locks on it to allow multiple people access, and my parents, with the purpose, had received a key to one of the locks on the gate. My parents decided to fence up our property, but leave a big enough gap that anyone with a lock could open this gate and drive through to the neighbor's land. Here is where the story starts. Cast: Mom, my mom, Dad, my dad, EF. We were doing most of the work on the weekends as my dad still had his regular job to work. We started putting up a fence on Friday evening, slept in the trailer, got up on Saturday, finished putting up the rest of the fence, and had planned on just enjoying Sunday. Midday Sunday, the neighbor showed up and started opening his gate. As my dad had run into town for something, my mom decided to go and introduce herself and make sure that the gap we had left was big enough for his access needs. All dialogue is approximate. Mom: Hi, you must be our new neighbor. We're the ones who bought this property. We live in the city and bought this as a vacation property. I just wanted to introduce myself and make sure that we left you enough room for any equipment you might need to get through this gate, as we won't always be here if it becomes an issue. EF: Your property line is off. If you look at the fence on the far side, there you'll see that you're taking more than your share. You need to remove your fence. Mom: We wondered about that too when we first saw the surveyor's stakes, but we've had a survey double-checked and it was done based on the town center. We were also assured that all marks are within 3 inches of truth. Note: We could roughly divide our property into thirds using existent land markers. 1/3 was on the other side of the stream, 1/3 from the stream to where the old fence would have continued if it hadn't made a 90-degree turn, and the last from the old fence line to the new fence that we had just put in. EF: That can't be right. Mom: You're more than welcome to have it double-checked if you want. EF: I use this stream to water my sheep, and if the property line is that far off from the old fence line in your favor, it easily could be that far off in the other direction, so all the land to the stream is mine. You need to get off. Mom: We purchased 3 acres worth of land, and what is left on the other side might be 1 acre, but there is no way it's 3. That survey can't be off by that much. I think this surprised EF, as my mom had said we were from the city and he didn't expect us city slickers to know what an acre is. and he decided to change tactics. EF. Even if the original property line was where you say it is, it doesn't matter now. The law says that if something is treated as the property line for X number of years, then it becomes the property line. Now, this is true, however, it must be treated as the property line by all owners involved in order to become the line in fact. I believe the reasoning for this law was to keep surveys that historically wandered a bit due to old surveys being less accurate than new surveys from causing too many property disputes. As the man who had owned this property before us had never been here, he couldn't have agreed to treat anything as the property line. EF. Since the fence in the stream has been used as the property line for my property for at least 20 years now, it definitely qualifies, and so all this land is mine no matter what your survey says. Mom. Look, we're not going to block your access to the stream. We won't be here most of the time, so it won't bother us if you drive your sheep through this access gap and water your animals. Also, as long as we can keep using this gate, we won't close up the gap and both of us can use it. You for your property and us for ours. I don't remember if he said anything after that, but he got in his truck and drove off into his property. Another thing to note is that this gate and road wasn't the primary access to his property. It was more of a convenient way to get this part of his land. If the earth opened up and created a canyon along the fence line the gate was on, he would still have access to all of his property. We went home at the end of the day so my dad could work his normal work week. The next weekend, when we got back down to our vacation property, we found that EF had ripped out our fence line where the old dirt track crossed it and piled it up along the old fence. We got to work putting it back in place. My dad decided that if that was how EF was going to behave, he would stop trying to accommodate him. We finished fencing our property right into the middle of his gate. We added our own gate next to it on our property. Also, the work we had originally planned on getting done this weekend was to dig a trench for the foundation of the home we were building. My dad decided that we could use the old dirt track that ran through the middle of our property as the driveway. He dug the trenches so that the foundation would be centered on the dirt track. The extra dirt and rocks dug up, he put it right on the dirt track at the edge of our property so that even if EF ripped out the fence, he still wouldn't be able to drive there. The EF did rip up our fence again and confronted my dad about the land being his, but by then my parents had consulted a lawyer and knew that there was nothing the EF could do. Once my parents had the lawyer send a cease and desist letter, we never heard from him again. In the end, instead of sharing a gate and herding his animals through the access point to water them with the stream on our property, he decided to destroy our fence. As a result, his access was closed and he needed to pay to buy water rights to water his animals. Next story. Some info. I'm a pretty tall dude. I'm a bit taller than 2 meters and I'm also a pretty big dude, like 130 kilograms, and I used to play offensive line in American football. I'm from Germany, so yes, I call it American football. And I'm a nurse. I was with 2 other guys with 20 girls in nursing school. Also, most people still accept a woman when they think of nurses. This gets important. I'm an ER nurse, and due to circumstances, I'm the temporary charge nurse for the ER. Our primary charge nurse is home with the virus, who shall not be named, and her secondary is on maternity leave, so management decided to put me in charge. I don't know why most people are surprised when they see that tall dude in dark blue scrubs in front of them, but I have bad encounters in relation to my gender very rarely. I mean, we're in the 21st century and all. Nearly 20% of nurses in Germany are male. That's more than in the US and the UK. Today was a day where my stature was really helpful. Cast. Me or OP, me. ED as our entitled power-tripping dad. NK, his real nice kid, elementary school age. And N, nice nurse, really the nicest nurse in the entire ER staff. I worked the night shift last night. Around 10 p.m. the ED came in with NK. NK had a slight fever and had vomited multiple times. He decided to bring the kid to the hospital, which is fine. But when you come into the ER, you know it could take some time. Because we have, emergencies. We had an emergency that night, ambulance and trauma room and all, so we had to stabilize him for emergency surgery. That was successful, and when I left the trauma room and took my gloves, NN came up to me, fighting with tears. She told me how Edie pretty much verbally abused her, told her she's bad at her job and she should get the doctor already, and that he wanted to have a word with the charge nurse to tell her how bad her employees are. Bad mistake, dipshit. Bad mistake. I told her to go into the break room, sit down, and I will handle it. That was his first strike. While walking down the hallway, everyone saw that I was out for blood. I'm a really calm man, but I tend to be protective of my patients and co-workers. My best work friend just shook his head like rest in peace, ED. So I set foot in the treatment room in which NK and ED were. NK just laid down on the hospital bed and, well, looked like a sick kid. ED stood beside her, talking on his phone. Back to me. Me. You wanted to talk to the charge nurse? ED. Oh yeah, wait, the stupid nurse is here. It was glorious when he turned around. I towered over him more than one head, and I was also a bit broader than him. I saw all that inflated ego shrunk away. Like his balls went up in his body. That wasn't that small 1.55 meter nurse anymore. ED. Yes? Me. So, what seems to be the problem, sir? ED. When does the doctor come to tend my daughter? Me. Well, sir, our doctors are seeing patients right now, so it can be a while. I heard you want to complain about NN. I crossed my arms. ED. Yeah, she was very unprofessional with my daughter and me. In which way was the behavior of NN unprofessional with NK? ED. She called my daughter sweetie. Me. NK. Was NN in any way mean to you? NK. No, she was pretty nice to me. He then shushed his daughter. Strike 2. I just hate people who won't let their kids speak when they ask. My parents did that all the time when I was little. Me. Okay, I will note down your complaint, and the doctor will see your daughter as soon as possible. ED. That's all? Me. What's that all? ED. That's all you're going to do? Note down my complaint? Pfft, you're as bad as this other nurse. I'll have a word with the doctor about the nursing staff around here. Strike 3. Me. Fine, you do that. You know what? I will get the doctor for you right now. I will tell the dude with the open fracture that the doctor will come back to him because someone wants to complain. Sounds okay to you? EM. Well, it's not that urgent, really. Me. Okay, let me tell you what. You stay here with your daughter and wait for the doctor like anyone else, and I will forget what happened here. Understood? EM mumbles and whispers. Yes. Me, my best and nicest customer service voice. Very well. If you need anything, don't hesitate to use the alarm. I left the room. ED was kind of a dick for the rest of the night, but he was much nicer. NN was done with caring for NK for the night. Around midnight or 1 a.m., the doctor tended to NK. She had some sort of stomach flu. He prescribed her some medications, and ED could take her home. The rest of my night shift was peaceful, and I'm glad it was my last night shift. I worked 7 nights in a row and now have 7 days off, so I can cool down.